So I got this comment the other day on one of my breastfeeding videos. It said, "Isn't it amazing how women have been breastfeeding since the beginning of time, but now they need a specialist? Animals don't have YouTube. Babies know more than mothers." I've heard this kind of thing loads of times, and in some ways I kind of get why people think this. Why does a totally natural act that women have been doing for hundreds of years need a teacher? It got me thinking about some natural things that we often seek guidance on, like language acquisition. Babies are born wired to learn how to talk, but they still need adults to guide them and teach them and just basically show them how. They also watch and learn from us too. The same goes for walking and other forms of communication. It's all a big learning curve. Well, today I want to have a go at making a case for breastfeeding educators like myself and specialised lactation consultants. There have been some major changes in social structures. Back in the day, women lived in tight-knit communities. Mothers, grandmothers, aunts, they were all around, and breastfeeding was just part of daily life. As a child, you would see it, learn from it, and when it was your turn, you had a whole village of women ready to help. But the world we live in today is very different from the world women lived in just a couple of generations ago. Without that close support system, many new mums find themselves navigating breastfeeding alone. And of course, your baby instinctively knows what they need, but you, especially if you're a first-time mum, might need a bit more guidance if you haven't been surrounded by breastfeeding growing up. And that's where lactation consultants come in. There's also the thing that just because something's natural, it doesn't mean it's easy. We think of breastfeeding as instinctual, and of course it is, but that doesn't mean it doesn't come without its challenges. In fact, a study found that 44% of mums reported problems with their baby's latch in just the first week of breastfeeding. And then there's nipple pain, milk supply worries, things that many mums don't expect or know how to handle. And that's just not me saying this. The CDC reports that 60% of mothers don't breastfeed for as long as they intend to. 60%. That's a lot of mums who are hitting roadblocks, and often it's because they don't have the right support. Lactation consultants are there to help get over those hurdles, whether it's latch issues, low milk supply, or just getting through the tough early days. And let's not forget, so much of breastfeeding is about confidence. It can feel like an emotional roller coaster when things don't go as planned, and that can really shake you as a new mum. It's your first real test as a mother, other than giving birth, of course, but studies show that the right kind of support can make a world of difference. For example, the CDC's 2020 breastfeeding report card highlights that getting professional support early on, within the first hours and days of birth, makes it much more likely that mums will reach their breastfeeding goals. So sometimes having a lactation consultant there to say, "You're doing great, keep going," can be all it takes to keep you on track. It's worth mentioning that there are plenty of situations where breastfeeding becomes more complicated. I'm talking about things like C-sections or babies who need to spend time in the NICU. A lot of mums who have C-sections find that it delays their breast milk coming in, and that can be pretty stressful. Premature babies, on the other hand, often have trouble feeding right away. In fact, according to the March of Dimes, about 1 in 10 babies in the US are born prematurely, and these babies often need specialised feeding support. Lactation consultants, breastfeeding counsellors, breastfeeding educators are crucial in these cases as they help mums establish milk supply, sometimes even when their baby can't latch right away. Of course, there are other complications like tongue-tie or laryngomalacia. My babies struggled with these conditions, which might have put a firm halt to our breastfeeding journey. Luckily, I was able to access expert support. We managed to overcome any difficulties, and I continue to breastfeed my kids for over a year each. Now, back to that comment about animals not needing YouTube. It's true, but if you've ever seen a newborn kitten or puppy struggle to find the right spot to nurse, you'll know it's not always smooth sailing for them either. How often have farmers had to step in to support an animal with a bottle or supplement their feeds? It happens more than you may think. And for most animals, their entire job as a new mum is just to feed their babies. Sure, some of them are trying to protect them from predators, but they don't have the same pressures as us. We don't live in herds or have farm hands to help us. We have lots of other distractions and responsibilities like cooking meals, keeping up the housework, maintaining our own health, let alone caring for the rest of the family, which is still pretty dependent on us. Which brings me on to another big breastfeeding barrier: work. With many mums returning to work outside of the home after having a baby, this has had a big impact on breastfeeding. In fact, in the US, about 25% of mums go back to work within 2 weeks. There's barely enough time to get breastfeeding started, let alone figure out pumping, maintaining milk supply, or juggling both. I want to share a statistic with you. A 2015 study found that 85% of breastfeeding mums in the US had pumped milk by the time their baby was 4 months old, often so they could go back to work. Pumping can be tricky, and it's not always as straightforward as it sounds. It can be tough emotionally too, being away from your baby but trying to keep breastfeeding going. This is another area where lactation consultants really help. They're there to show you the ropes, help you figure out pumping, and find ways to balance work and breastfeeding. Can we just talk about formula for a minute? I'm not going to take a for or against position, but I think it has had a big impact on breastfeeding. For a lot of the 20th century, formula was marketed as the modern scientific alternative to breastfeeding. By the 1950s, it was everywhere, and in some countries, like the US, breastfeeding rates dropped as low as 20% by the 70s. That's a huge cultural shift in just a couple of generations. Now, what does that mean for us today? It means we've lost a lot of that generational knowledge about breastfeeding. When you don't have a mum or grandma who breastfed, you don't have someone to call up and ask, is this latch supposed to hurt? Or why is my baby feeding so much? It's a big gap in knowledge that lactation consultants are here to fill. What's more, aggressive marketing of formula has been such a big issue that the World Health Organization had to step in. In 1981, they introduced the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes to try and curb this. It was designed to prevent formula companies from promoting their products in ways that undermined breastfeeding. But even today, that law isn't followed as strictly as it should be in many countries, including the US. We all know breast milk is great for babies, but it's worth reminding ourselves just how beneficial it really is. Breastfeeding reduces the risk of infections, asthma, and even sudden infant death syndrome, which you may know as SIDS. For mums, it helps with faster recovery from birth, reduces the risk of breast and ovarian cancers, and it may even lower the risk of postpartum depression. And on a larger scale, breastfeeding has the potential to save lives. According to a 2016 report by The Lancet, increasing breastfeeding rates globally could save the lives of 820,000 children under 5 each year. That is a big deal. Now let's touch on something that doesn't get talked about enough: postpartum depression. About 1 in 8 women experience PPD after having a baby, and it's tough. But what's really interesting is that there's a connection between breastfeeding and reducing the risk of PPD. A large study of almost 30,000 women found that the longer a mother breastfeeds, the lower her risk of developing postpartum depression. The emotional bonding during breastfeeding and the release of oxytocin, known as the love hormone, play a big role here. Plus, having the right support, like from a lactation consultant, breastfeeding educator, or similar, can make the breastfeeding experience smoother, which in turn helps reduce stress and anxiety. I can't make a video like this without mentioning the pressures that come from society, and especially social media. We live in a world where information, true and false, spreads fast. Unfortunately, there's a lot of messaging out there that makes breastfeeding seem incredibly difficult, sometimes even impossible, without really addressing the fact that with the right support, it doesn't have to be. There's also this pressure that if you're not doing it perfectly right away, you're failing. It's no wonder so many new mums feel overwhelmed and unsure about breastfeeding. But that's where having evidence-based guidance from a lactation consultant can really help, cutting through the noise, the myths, and offering real personalised support. So do we need lactation consultants and breastfeeding educators? Absolutely. Several studies show that breastfeeding education and support interventions like the ones provided by lactation consultants do make a big difference. They help improve both breastfeeding rates and how long mums breastfeed for. Research tells us that the quality of the content and delivery of the education matter more than just the number of people providing it. So we don't just need more educators, we need more expert educators, people who really understand breastfeeding, who can provide personalised, evidence-based support to mums. And that's exactly what lactation consultants do.